Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Bridge Lunch Break event on Bridge, Michigan's Journalistic Impact. My name is Amber DeLinde. I'm the Membership and Engagement Director at Bridge, Michigan, which is your source for nonprofit, nonpartisan news in Michigan. During this hour, we'll discuss Bridge's work and impact on the state over the past 12 years. Today, I'm joined by Senior Editor David Zeman and Executive Editor of Impact and Enterprise, Joel Kurth, who will be discussing stories that have made a difference, our plans for 2024, and future projects. We'll also be joined briefly around the middle point of our conversation by a few of our reporters who I'm excited to introduce you to. You can read full bios to our panelists on the event page, and we'll drop a link to that page in the chat. So if you want to see full biographies of our panelists, you'll be able to take a peek there. Our conversation will take place in just a moment, and I'll lead the discussion with David and Joel for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will turn to your questions. If you have questions for David and Joel or members of our team, please be sure to type those into the chat window. You can do that at any time. You don't need to wait for the end of the event. If you're not a panelist, please stay muted throughout today's conversation. As you heard at the beginning, we are recording today's conversation. It'll be posted on Bridge Michigan's website this week. If you don't already, you can subscribe to our email newsletters, where you'll also get be sent a link to that recording by visiting www.bridgemi.com and clicking subscribe. Events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge Michigan's members. If you'd like to join our membership community, we'll drop a link to do so in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, please stay muted throughout today's conversation. And without any further ado, I'd like to get us started. I am going to start our conversation today with some questions for David, who is our senior editor and who will be sadly retiring from Bridge, Michigan at the end of this month. So I'm excited today to talk with David about sort of the stories that have meant the most to him over the last 10 plus years that he's been at Bridge, Michigan, and sort of the impact that some of those stories have had on our state. So David, to start, as I thought back on our time together, we've both been, the entire time I've worked at Bridge, Michigan for most of that time, you've been a senior editor here. So I've had a lot of opportunity to get to know you and to admire your work. I can really recall many amazing projects and stories that you had a part of that made our state better. And so that's sort of where I want to start our conversation today. So first of all, you led our coverage of the Flint water crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Bridge Michigan's reporting on the water crisis was used by both the public and those who documented the government's missteps throughout this tragic event?
Sure. I mean, first with mea culpa, I'll start, which is that Bridge, like a lot of news organizations and like obviously state government itself, was late to the Flint water crisis. A lot of the alarm was sounded by people on the ground, Flint activists, a local pediatrician, and others, and a few other really terrific journalists in the state to get the state and the nation's attention focused on what those residents of Flint were going through. So I wish Flint had been earlier to this, or that Bridge had been earlier to the story. But we tried to make up for it by throwing a ton of resources at it, and a lot of our attention. I would think the most significant contribution that we made was putting together this incredible timeline. As many of you will recall, at some point after the heat grew really fierce on the Snyder administration, Governor Snyder, to his credit, released thousands and thousands of pages of documents to answer the question of what people in his administration knew as they were making decisions about changing the water source for Flint that resulted in some of this lead-laden water. And when they knew it, and whether they acted upon real concerns that were raised as people were consuming the water and washing in the water and so forth. And Michigan has this really terrible public records law where very little is from the executive branch or the legislative branch can be obtained through public records, but again, Snyder, to his credit, released thousands of documents, and I edited that timeline, but really most of the credit should go to our now former CEO, John Bebo, who took it upon himself as we were all doing our own stories on Flint to take these thousands of pages of documents and assemble them into this enormous timeline that we had to break into 3 or 4 parts just to get it on the server. And it really put together in a way that was that no one else had ever done. What people at the state level knew, what people at the EPA and the federal level knew, what the emergency managers who were presiding over Flint and some other really impoverished cities that had been appointed by the Snyder administration, what they knew at the time. And it's really, once you put those all in a sequential timeline, which just took weeks and weeks and weeks, and was done mostly by John, to really gain a picture of it allowed what it did was allow the public to understand what people knew at different snapshots in time, and was it reasonable or unreasonable for them, given what they knew, to take the action that they took or didn't take. So that timeline was something that actually became used and cited by a subsequent task force that the Snyder administration put together to examine what happened in Flint, what went wrong, what could have been done better. It was used by researchers at Virginia Tech and by news organizations all over the world to help people better understand it. And it was nothing flashy. It was just this sort of shoe leather journalism that dogged reporters undertake in order to better understand the world around them. Or our world then was Flint, as we were trying to provide readers with really a balanced view of what was happening. So I was really proud of that. We also happened to produce a book about our coverage of Flint. I think it was the first of several books that Bridge put together. And I think this speaks to sort of the entrepreneurial spirit of Bridge, Michigan, then Bridge Magazine, in that we could just try all kinds of, crazy things with a staff that was really only a few people at the time. And to put this together, and it allowed us to reach out to readers across the state, and as you, Amber, were leading discussions across the state through our small reader meetings where you travel all through Michigan. The book as well helped us put it all together. So we didn't break the Flint water crisis, but I think we fulfilled what I still see as, in many ways, is our primary mission, which is to provide context and perspective to readers to help them better understand what's happening in their state.
Thanks, David. That's one of the things that is so striking for me when I think about Bridge's coverage of the Flint water crisis, is that it sort of does when we do what I think we do best, which is providing nuance and context to a story that can make it useful for individuals who are trying to understand an event, for people living in a community, but also for those who are working to change things or who are working to make policy. That's sort of the sweet spot that I think that Bridge is sometimes able to really hit. And that's something that I saw in this project, and also in one that I'm about to ask you about. So in just the last few months, you edited a major collaborative reporting project between business editor Paula Gardner, who I think is here today, hi Paula, and environmental reporter Kelly House, about the lasting impacts of the automotive industry on both the state's economy and environmental quality. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how such a project came about, what was found, just reminding us, and also, why this was an important story to tell right now?
Yeah, sure. One of our core missions is to bring transparency to public policy and to government decisions, and I think that's, you could say that about a number of really good news organizations around Michigan. And what we were seeing in the last year or two with Governor Whitmer and, at least at the beginning, leaders on both sides in the legislature, was a lack of transparency in their administration of the so-called SOAR fund, which is, Paula can explain it better than I can, but it was this effort by the state after being snubbed for large EV electric vehicle plants in Tennessee and Kentucky and elsewhere. An effort by state leaders to say, hey, we're not going to lose out on any more of these things, and we want to have money around so that we can entice large companies to bring large-scale manufacturing projects to Michigan. Some of the biggest projects and some of the first projects all surrounded, our iconic industry, which is the automobile industry, and these EV projects by GM and Ford, et cetera. And what we were seeing was, just a lack of transparency in how these deals came about, but also in what was being asked of these companies that were coming here. Anyone who lives in Michigan and has read the newspapers and been around for 20 or 30 years knows the hallowed place that the auto industry has in our culture and in our economy. We write about it all the time, including yesterday. People also know that, and this series helped bring it to light, about all of the properties that the auto industry has built factories on and used for generations and then closed, but in many cases leaving behind, ground pollution, all sorts of pollution in its wake. And then here we had this drive by the Whitmer administration to award these large new contracts to the same industry without asking them to leave the property in the same sort of pristine condition that it obtained it. And this has been a history for generations, and we documented there are more than 26,000 polluted industrial sites throughout Michigan, including, obviously many from the auto industry. And we had these two terrific reporters, Kelly House, who's won national awards for environmental reporting, and we have a business reporter in Paula, who's also for many years covered the environment, including Flint water crisis for MLive before she came here. And so we had this great combination of skills and interests and passions and so forth. And we wanted to show, as the policy was still being developed, and it is still being developed in Lansing, we have this whole history of abandoned sites that are polluted. Are we repeating history again by just throwing all this money at auto companies without asking them to be good environmental stewards in return? And so we saw this as an opportunity to really provide a lot of information as policy was being made, and they carried it out beautifully.
I agree. I loved that project. I also loved how it brought individual, sort of real people's voices to a big policy issue, which is just something that
and a lot of small town voices, a lot of, not just of people who were left looking across the street at polluted sites, but also these town officials who were left with the bill to pay for it. And I think, one of the things I'm most proud of about some of our best stories is that they can provoke outrage and accountability that really cuts across politics. And I think this was one of those instances.
Absolutely. Another topic that has sort of been part of Bridge Michigan coverage a lot over the last several years, really, was the effort around redistricting in Michigan. So sort of covering that effort to get redistricting on the ballot, then the process of developing the redistricting committee, actually redrawing electoral districts, and now sort of where we are. It's complex. It's a really complicated issue without a lot of precedent in our state. How did you and Joel and sort of the whole team work together to help guide our reporting team on this effort and help readers understand sort of its implications and complexity?
Sure. We understood from the beginning when voters, not politicians, the advocacy group that really got this campaign to get independent redistricting panel to take over drawing congressional and state political lines. We understood from the beginning that this was something that readers, again, across the political spectrum, would have a stake in, number one, and but secondly, we saw it as sort of a daunting challenge to make it explainable to them. Politics, like education, like health and everything else, has its own jargon. In sort of redistricting has its own sort of jargon within politics. And so we thought it was really important to explain, what the competing policy arguments were. We thought that there was sort of a broad-based acceptance across Michigan that having the political party that happened to be in charge every decade draw their own political boundaries was on its face antithetical to good governance. And so it was our job to just make it understandable. We don't talk down to readers, but we try to go through the thicket of information to try to help them understand where the issues are. And we did this through, as people will recall, 3 or 4 years ago, there were huge fights in the state Supreme Court over whether this proposal could go on the state ballot. And as Joel and his political team have been following in recent months, that has come up again when this federal panel struck down some of the House and Senate districts in and around Detroit. So, again, it was more of an example of explanatory journalism, and also, it was really interesting to see this group from Voters Not Politicians go up against a lot of established interests that have spent decades trying to keep the system as it was, and really reach voters and communicate with average voters in a way that turned out to be more effective than the other groups were doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've been thinking a bit about, sort of, as I've been reflecting to prepare for this event, sort of some of the really tough issues that Bridge has had to make some, decisions about how and when to cover, and what, really tough subjects that you had to tackle, and the editorial team has had to tackle over the last 2 years. And really, as senior editor, I've noticed that you really never shied away from difficult subjects or stories. Can you talk to us a bit about sort of how you lead a newsroom through coverage of stories like the tragic shooting at MSU and sort of the investigative reporting around response to the shooting, or the sexual assault accusations against former Speaker of the House Lee Chatfield? When you get stories like that, how do you lead the team through them and make sure that our reporting is nuanced and fair and accurate? And
Sure.
how do you tackle something like that?
Sure. I mean, I think an ethos that has run through this organization from the time I've been here, and I know Joel and his new executive editor partner Lisa shared as well, is sort of running toward difficult subjects rather than avoiding them. First of all, I just think it's more interesting. I mean, I'm editing a story today about how teachers are talking in classrooms around Michigan about the Israeli-Hamas war, in Gaza and in Israel, and how they balance such a difficult and complicated subject. And I think good reporters and good journalists love the complication, love the complicated stories, and love the stories that people have a difficult time perhaps wrapping their arms around, or a difficult time articulating their differences with other people, and that's, I think, where our sweet spot is. And so I don't think it was a difficult decision for us. I mean, obviously with something like MSU, and this is not provenance only of Bridge. I mean, every news organization in the state covered it. And we covered the human element of it, of course. You know, all of us, either have, have kids or were probably once kids. And to go through that, whether you're talking about something at the college level or at the high school level at Oxford and so forth, it's something that everyone feels very personally in Michigan, I could say, across the country. So it was a compelling story. But once the dust cleared on the chaotic events of that night almost a year ago, our responsibility returned to accountability. And how did Michigan State and how did their officials handle this? What could they have done differently? And that's always a balancing act, right? Because we try to speak truth to power. We try to get information to see how our institutions are performing. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that these institutions are made up of human beings who are acting under the most trying and extraordinary of circumstances. And did they act reasonably? Did they not act reasonably? And so we got to work, and we, like many reporters, again, not unique to Bridge, tried to get as many documents as we can, talk to as many students as we can, and find out how their public safety organization responded to the first 911 calls that started to come in from Berkey Hall that evening. And then why it took so long from the first calls to come in of an active shooter to the time in which the university put out messages across campus notifying everyone of that. There are questions about, security in buildings. People could walk into buildings. Were there locks on individual classroom doors? The time element, what were the communication security apparatus at Michigan State? How did it compare to what was the kind of security at other major universities across the United States? That's the kind of context that we sought to bring. We didn't try to be harshly critical of MSU or unfair to MSU, but if there are a number of other universities that are doing some basic things in terms of their communication network and so forth that Michigan State wasn't, it's a fair question to ask, why not? And, as often happens with stories with Michigan State, and to be fair with the University of Michigan as well, there are examples A and B of why we need to improve our public records laws, because both universities' records of transparency are abysmal and have been for years.
Thanks, David. I just, to make sure that we have time to take some reader questions, I'm going to move us to a few questions just about sort of the evolution of Bridge over your time as senior editor. So I just wondered if you could walk us through what you've noticed as far as an evolution in Bridge's goals or reach or culture or impact over your time, over your
Sure.
10 plus years here.
Yeah, I think that in many ways the reporters can speak about it better than I can. When I first started 10 plus years ago, we had Ron French, who's on this call. We had Nancy Derringer as our two staffers. We had a part-time freelancer in Ted Rolos out in West Michigan. And that was it. We were an organization that put out maybe a couple of newsletters a week. We did our best, and we were, small and feisty and whatever. And now we've become larger and feisty. Every time we now have a dozen or so reporters, we continue, and editors, and we continue to be expanding. We were very conscious and deliberate about wanting to expand Bridge, Michigan, from this sort of insiderish Lansing newsletter, mostly politics letter, into a brand that covered all of the major important issues to Michigan. My mission in particular was I wanted our work to be of value to any resident in the state of Michigan. They didn't have to be a lobbyist or a political insider. It's our job to make legislation surrounding the environment or health or business or education, to show its relevance, why what's happening in Lansing is relevant to the lives and success of people who live across the state. And John Bebo, who hired me, and Phil Power, who hired me and signed off on it, Phil and Kathy Power, um, they shared that vision, and so we're able to attract, some of the best talent across the state and across the country, to come here because they knew that they would have the time and the resources to do the kind of work that they were increasingly unable to do at more traditional newsrooms. And so Bridge has carved out a niche as a place that is sort of a pain in the ass to Republican and Democratic administrations, but also has a reputation for fairness and depth and perspective. And when we say we're nonpartisan, we really mean it, and we look for good ideas from wherever they come from whatever party they come from. That's why we often travel to different states to show, hey, here's what this red state did. Here's what this blue state did on, say, education. Here's how they've solved things that Michigan is now grappling with. And we tried to enlarge our own world and tried to enlarge our readers' perspective by offering some models for things that we might be struggling with.
Thank you so much. David, I know I'm going to turn back to you at the very end to give you a chance at a last word, but for the moment, I'd like to call on a few of our reporters that I see on the event here, just to give them a chance to reflect on their time working with you as their editor. So first, I'd like to invite Ron French, who is our enterprise reporter and associate editor, and I think the longest serving member of the Bridge Michigan editorial team, to join us to just reflect briefly on sort of, Ron, my question for you is, what it's been like to have David as an editor, and in what ways does he make your reporting even better?
Here's where we make David feel uncomfortable. I can tell you that. He hates having people talk about him. But I'll be as brief as I can. I could go on for a long, long time. But just for our readers who are on this Zoom, and just want to give you just an inkling of the sort of person and editor that David has been here at Bridge. There's a phrase that is thrown around a lot at Bridge, that we say family first. And David exemplifies that. He has always, put the well-being of his staff first, above the publication, above himself. Our problems are his problems, and our failures are his, and he has always been just super supportive. And that's why I think that you find that when you look at other publications, perhaps people stay here longer, is the sort of, because people are loyal to people who are loyal to them. So thank you, David, for that. As far as the sort of editor he is, that has helped build Bridge to what it is today. The best way to tell you what he's like is, it's a silly little example, but I'll explain why. There was a couple of years ago, I wrote a story. I don't have any recollection of what it was. It was nothing major, but David edited it and passed it on for publication with no comments to me. I immediately called him and asked him if he was feeling okay, because David, and this is the most positive sense possible. I can explain it to you. David does everything he can to make the stories as good as they possibly can for the readers. It's not unusual for reporters to think the stories are done and passed on to our staff that actually puts them on our website. And you look at it in our system, and you see David is in there looking for one word to change to make it better, to going through everything one more time. That's why our if you think that our reporting and writing is so good, a hell of a lot of that has to do with David. So thank you
so much, Ron. Next, I'd like to welcome Isabel Lohman, who's our education reporter, to just talk about her experience having David as an editor.
Is this going to turn into a Trump cabinet meeting here?
I'll be short. I'm Isabel. I'm the education reporter. I've been here for about 2 years, and I actually just pulled up the email that David first sent to me when I was like looking into this job. I think David makes a lot of things better. He makes our writing better. I mean, he just talked about that story that we're working on, and he's added so much context and just made the story better, I think, to help readers, even if it's a Michigan story, look at the nation or look at internationally what's happening. And then, like Ron, I would say he's like incredibly kind. In his initial emails to me explaining this opening 2 years ago, he was super thorough. He explained work-life balance. He talked about his personal philosophies, and he also was a really open book. And I think I know there's a reader question about like what gets reporters to stay. I think that like spirit of entrepreneurship and also just like supporting your readers and your reporters really well, I think that's really come through. I'm really going to miss David. I still expect to text him. And I think he just does a really good job of seeing holes in your reporting and urging you to go back and do more so that the end product is better at the end.
Thanks, Isabel. And then finally, I just wanted to ask Paula Gardner, our business editor, to chime in.
Yeah, I saw a comment or a question about how Bridge attracts reporters, and they attract reporters by their editors. Yeah, I was ready to grow. I wanted to expand what I could accomplish, and I chose Bridge, and Bridge chose me, and I've never really looked back. And a big part of that is working with David, who I don't think really likes business news, possibly at all. but but he's willing to listen to the stories and my pitches and the things that I find interesting, and somehow like he pulls my interest out in telling a good story that I know is still kind of rooted in the beat, but also something that he might be willing to read or other people might be willing to read. He's always made everything better that he's touched of mine. And I too will miss him. I can echo the things everybody else has said. But industrial legacy did come up earlier. And I just want to say that is something that started as just a seed of conversation between Kelly and me. And over time, we just kept coming back to it. And finally, I think we pushed a little harder and David embraced it a little tighter. And we always had the room to make it something. We had the encouragement, we had the sharp questions that helped us focus a little bit more. And we just had a partner in telling that story that I think was just priceless for what it became and for the process during it.
Thanks so much, Paula. Well, David, I'm going to let you off the hook for a little bit here and turn to Joel Kurth, who is our executive editor for Impact and Enterprise. And Joel, I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of the future and what's coming next at Bridge. So thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course. As you know, in the office, we've been talking a lot about this year and calling it sort of internally our year of vision, because big transitions are happening. We're setting our big picture plans for the next 5 years and beyond. What can you tell readers in broad strokes about sort of our vision for 2024?
Sure. I think that, I started in 2017. I have a David Zeman origin story too, but we've heard a lot of nice things about David. I'll embarrass him later. So, I think that, we have a unique opportunity at Bridge. We have very secure finances because of an awesome revenue team. We have incredible journalists. And there's a lot of challenges in Michigan, and there's a lot of challenges reaching audience in Michigan. So I think what we want to do is sharpen our focus in terms of the types of stories we tell. I think we're never going to lose our explanatory origins, but I think we want to complement the explanatory with investigations that can lead to changes, and also find new ways to reach audiences. I think we were founded as sort of an alternative to keeping the Sunday newspaper alive, and I think now, fortunately, we're at an age now where there's a lot of readers who don't even know what a Sunday newspaper is. And so I think it's a good testament to journalism in general, that there are younger people who are looking for information. And I just think we need to refine how we go about it a little bit. And I've been incredibly lucky that we brought on an editing partner for myself, Lisa Yannick Litwiller, who is an expert at growing audiences and fostering culture change, to help us, think about how best to reach new audiences in the next 5 years, whether it's through newsletters, podcasts, YouTube channels, passenger pigeons, or pneumatic tubes.
Thank you. You just touched on it a little bit, but we are sort of updating, changing our editorial structure and growing, which is very exciting. I just wondered if you could touch a little bit more about what that new editorial structure looks like. What might readers notice when we're fully staffed up?
Sure, we're going to be hiring, David is so difficult to replace that we're going to hire two deputy editors to help our coverage. And I think we're going to be seeing, more newsletters. I don't think we're going to see a ton of changes this year, but I think that's one thing we want to do. And one of the things I think that's really attracted to myself and other great journalists to Michigan is that we try to be very deliberative and not reactive about what we do. So I think this year is an opportunity for all of us to get together, retool a little bit. We're losing David, we lost John Bebow, we have an excellent CEO in Katie Locker. But there's been a lot of change in a short period of time. So I think this year is an opportunity to pause, look around, maybe eat some ice cream, and think about what we want to look like in the year 2030.
Thanks, Joel. Obviously, this is an important election year. Well, it's not a gubernatorial election. There are certainly lots of elections taking place in Michigan, including a very important national one. What does our election year coverage strategy look like for Bridge, Michigan, especially in a presidential election year?
Sure, we're gonna, do what we do best, which is, explain the issues, explain the facts, do so comprehensively and authoritatively. There's not a gubernatorial election. There's going to be a closely watched Senate race, and I think also the balance of the House is going to go through three disputed seats in Michigan congressional districts, and so I think the challenge for us as we're developing the plan is that our first mission is to our residents and informing residents, helping them make clear, cogent, informed choices, but also acknowledging that really, as far as the nation goes, it runs through Michigan this year. I think that the balance of the House, the balance of the Senate, and the White House are all going to be decided potentially by Michigan. So a strategy in which informs residents about the issues that they can vote on, but also opening the aperture a little bit to provide that perspective of the national import, I think is going to be important for us.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the subject of today's conversation, or at least our title, was Bridge, Michigan's journalistic impact. So obviously we've talked a lot about impact today. When you're thinking about the impact of our stories and the type of impact you want to have, how do you assess what our impact is? How do we measure it? How do we think about it?
Sorry, I got distracted. I have a terrorist cat who's doesn't really care about me most of the day, and all of a sudden is very curious about this. So I think as it relates to impact, I think the biggest way we can impact things is to change laws and to make things better for people, and that can be through shining lights on situations that they're not people haven't heard about before. It can be about changing policy And I think, we did recently just get a grant to help us measure impact, because it's really a buzzword in the media right now. But other than large changes in policy, it's kind of hard, especially as audiences get fragmented, to get a better sense of how stories change people's lives. And so that's definitely going to be something that we are, putting under the microscope again this year and figuring out new metrics for that.
Excellent. The other thing we've talked a lot about, you and I, just in these first few questions is about change. But obviously, many things are staying the same at Bridge, Michigan. What can readers expect to see consistently from Bridge? What's staying the same?
Well, I think we have the secret sauce of environment, health, business, a lot of Lansing, data, policy, how people live, the long stories. We've done a lot of more shorter stories. That's all going to stay the same. I think we're still going to explain how laws are made, what impact they have. We're going to be getting out into the state more this year when this fog lifts eventually today. I don't think people are going to notice a ton of difference. I think we're going to be providing more content in newsletters, but I think it's going to be the same product that we've known for a while, and changes are going to come incrementally. But I think we also know that we have the best, most loyal audience in Michigan, and they're coming along with us. Everything we do is going to be measured and done with the audience that we have in mind, but just growing that audience.
Thank you. I have just a couple more questions for you, and then I want to open it up to a couple of reader questions that have been submitted via the chat. If you have other questions for David or Joel, please feel free to type them there now. We'll be turning to those in just a moment. I'm now going to give you your chance to make David uncomfortable. I just want to give you a chance to weigh in on what you've enjoyed most about working with David in your time at Bridge.
He's okay, no, I'm kidding. There's a lot, like everyone else. I would say ultimately, to take one story, it just came out at a call today. We were talking about our horror stories as reporters. And I was reminded of the time that one of our former reporters wrote a story about Harvard, about a student from inner city Detroit getting into Harvard, and how happy her parents were, and how the school she attended was, and how they had a party for her. And it turned out we did an article on it. It was supposed to be a feel-good story. And then as readers came forward with donations, her story gradually unraveled, and it was an elaborate hoax. She's fooled her schools, she fooled her counselors, she fooled her parents. She showed our reporter a false letter of acceptance that was immaculately hoaxed. And in a lot of newsrooms, the temptation would be to do a correction and just pretend like it never happened. What I love about David is that he wants to be it's important for we went at it and were as hard on ourselves in investigating how we made that mistake as we would be on Governor Whitmer or Governor Snyder or anyone else. And we published a long article, not only retracting it, but including quotes from journalism ethics professors about what we could have done differently, how we messed up. And I think that's one of many, many things that I, just really admire about David, is that, he takes everything very seriously. He's his own worst critic. His instinct is one that I've learned too, is not to be defensive, but to, absorb the criticism and see what we could do differently. And, I'll echo everyone's comments. I mean, it's been an honor in my career to work with him.
Thanks, Joel. My last question before I turn it over to some questions that have been submitted from readers is just kind of is there anything else that you want readers to know about Bridge, Michigan in 2024 or beyond? Is there anything that you want people to be looking out for or be thinking about?
Mostly tell us, if this only works with an open dialogue. We're going to be experimenting a lot. We're going to be trying new things, trying new different types of storytelling. You may see newsletters come into your inbox at odd times, and I want to be as receptive to criticism as David was, and I want as much feedback as possible. And we love it when people keep us on our toes, and I just hope our audience continues to do so.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna ask you and David a couple of questions that have come in from
I think
readers.
Ken Winter's raising his hand.
All right.
Amber,
Yes.
I have to leave for class, but I wanted to thank everybody on the staff for the fine job what you've done. I started with you as a volunteer when we started with Phil, and I just can't believe what we've grown since then. So I'll go to my class, and thank you for everything that you've all done, especially you, David.
Thanks, Ken. All right. We have just a couple of questions that are really sort of, a lot of the questions that have come in so far have been around sort of the same central themes, which are kind of the state of local news, around funding and around sort of how newspapers and other news outlets are surviving. So one reader asked, what is the state of local community journalism and what you think the future of small town journalism is? Give you a chance to pontificate a little bit here for David and Joel, whoever wants to start out.
Joel, you want that?
All you, baby.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think anyone who's been even a casual consumer of news understands that there's absolutely a crisis going on, and it's not confined to Michigan. We've, in the past 5 to 7 years, have been asked by a number of organizations and civic groups if we would consider, we have in our family of news publications, we have Bridge Detroit, which does a tremendous job covering the issues and the audience of the city of Detroit. And we've been asked many times if we could do something similar in other parts of the state, and including in small parts of the state. Some of my favorite stories, and I think some of the favorite stories of the people on the staff, have been stories from really rural or largely uncovered areas of Michigan. And readers love those as well. Our stories from business and environmental stories in the Upper Peninsula to our stories on disability rates and some rural and undercovered areas of the lower Michigan have been some of our best read stories. So there's an absolute hunger for those from our statewide audience, and just from the information that we're getting, the appeals that we're getting from small and mid-sized towns, as more mainstream organizations cut back on staffing and funding and so forth, tells us there's a real need. But you will also likely notice that my response has no solutions in there, and it's the great white whale that the entire industry is chasing, whether you're talking about national organizations or small and regional publications as well.
I will say that I feel like in this year of visioning, that the big question for us is going to be the geographic expansion and what that could look like. I think it comes with there's a heavy demand for it from us. I think we could do it financially. I think the question is going to be how, and maintaining Bridge's brand for excellent journalism. But I think that's something we're definitely attuned to, and we will approach with great enthusiasm and deliberativeness.
Absolutely. And there was a follow-up question about essentially what do you do to combat private equity taking over local news, is you support your local news outlets. I mean, that's really the answer. There are a lot of, we are not the only nonprofit news organization in the state of Michigan. There are local outfits out there, support them and subscribe. There are, I'm trying to think, earlier in the chat, there was a question about sort of where our coverage around, and we may not know because this is an issue that has lots of twists and turns, but where our coverage on Line 5 is headed in 2024.
I think we're going to continue covering it. As people know, I think it's been tied up, you know, in the courts. We've done a lot of articles about where that stands. I think we've done some analysis on Dana Nessel's efforts to shut it down. She's not had a lot of luck in that regard. And I would expect we continue to cover it. I think the reporter, the questioner, asked our opinions, and you should of course know that we have no opinion on the merits of the of Line 5, other than that we will cover the hell out of it.
Absolutely. We did have a question earlier that Joel dropped the answer in the chat. I'm going to drop it again into lower down in case you missed it. So there was a question about sort of how Bridge Michigan is funded. So as a nonprofit news organization, that could be a new funding model that folks aren't always super acquainted with. We are transparent about who our funders are, and they're listed fully in our annual report. I'm dropping right now the link to the 2023 annual report. The 2024 annual report is coming soon. It'll be a report about 2023. So the last year's was about 2022, but that'll be coming soon. You can see a full list of our funders and also our editorial ethics policy about how those folks have no influence over our coverage.
And it's of course important to note that with every funder that we approach or who approaches us, there's always the understanding that they're same with readers as well. You know, I mean, readers are so important to our financial security, which is that, you know, you're funding our journalism, you're funding nonpartisan, nonprofit journalism to cover the biggest and most important issues impacting our state. And anyone who funds us understands that they're not buying a particular take on what that journalism would look like. And we're blessed, you know, we've had philanthropic support and you know, from the beginning. And it wouldn't have been possible without their support and of course without the generous yearly donations that Phil and Kathy Power have made and will continue to make to this organizations. But they all understand that things that we can write might upset them, or, you know, from time to time. But I think over the years we've hopefully given them faith that we're approaching it from a nonpartisan, non-ideologically driven perspective. And I think that's why we've been so successful.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I'm going to sign off in just a moment here, but I did want to give one last chance. David, if you have anything that you would like to say to readers, or just give you a chance for a last word before we sign off for the afternoon.
Oh gosh, you know, it's been such a joy to lead this newsroom, and you know, it's a place where everyone feels like they have a voice, and I didn't always feel that when I was, you know, in larger news publications, and I'm glad that we have it here. We have such an active base of readers who don't hesitate to let us know when they disagree with us, how we could have done something better, when we've fallen short, and we're just lucky as hell. And I just want every reader to know that that we don't take it for granted. We approach our work passionately, but also humbly. And we're all in this together, and we'll continue to be. And you know, Bridge has great leadership going forward, and it's just going to continue to grow and grow in influence as well.
Thanks so much, David. I'm going to hand it over to Jackie Garrett to close us out.
Yeah. One moment, Joel. I just wanted to say thank you so much to David, Joel, Ron, Isabel, Paula. The entire Bridge staff is, hanging in here cheering for David and his next steps. And also thanks to all of our participants, our loyal readers. You make all of this work possible. I want to just share that we'll be posting a recording of today's program on Bridge Michigan's website. You can find that at bridgemi.com/events and our social media channels as well. You'll see that this week. And our next event will be announced very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all again and have a great day.